the final chapter, he wrote this. He says, I realize that people, even those who have atrocious politics, still have the capacity for decency and kindness. I firmly believe most people still have the desire to do good in the world. And then he says this, and sometimes some people do change. That was, if you had the same book as I was on page 226. And then a few pages later, he identifies this challenge for America in his book. He says, the challenge for America is whether or not it will live up to its narrative of being a sanctuary, a haven for all, a place where anyone can come and achieve success and freedoms. So having said that, some of you may have gotten a supplemental reading list. If not, they were in the library. I think some of them may have been at Long's. It has related books that you can read. And one of the things that was listed was a YouTube video that the author did. It's actually a TED Talk. I think it was done during the pandemic. And it's about 16 minutes long, so we're not going to play all of it. We're just going to play the first 8 minutes. So the author's talking about hope. A lot of it's...
The last time I addressed this august TED crowd was in 2019 from the main stage in Vancouver, where I was giving my talk, my first TED Talk, on the case for having children. And that's where I shared the news I had just received earlier in the week that my then 2-year-old daughter, Nuseba, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and needed a full liver transplant. So, how have your past 3 years been? As you can imagine, our last 3 years have been eventful. However, they have given me some tough, learned, lived experiences and lessons about this ephemeral thing we call hope. And apparently, there's a huge demand for hope right now. In 2022, we're all dealing with multiple crises. A pandemic has killed 900,000 Americans. There's a partial lockdown. There's disinformation. There's income inequality, the rise of white supremacy, people telling people like me, go back to where you came from. We have to learn new Greek letters every few months. And oh yeah, there's climate change. But other than that, things are pretty peachy. And with all of that, you might be asking, well then, why should we be hopeful in such hopeless times, Wajahat? And that is a very valid question. And it's a perfectly fair question. But hope is what allowed me to believe that my daughter would somehow survive. And she did. And so, if I may, allow me to share briefly 3 pieces of advice or lessons or things that we can do that gave me hope in hopeless times and that I hope can help you. Number 1, tie your camel first. There's a great saying in Islam, many Muslims know this, that have faith in God, but tie your camel first. As a dad, I felt utterly hopeless with Nuseba's cancer. I'm the dad. I'm supposed to fix things, but I couldn't fix cancer. Cancer plays for all the marbles. It's a relentless, brutal, remorseless killing machine. It does not care about your vacation plans. It does not care about your bucket list. It does not care about your Netflix queue. It comes for everything. Then, coronavirus. Awesome. How do I defeat coronavirus? A 41-year-old, middle-aged, slightly overweight male with flat foot. It's easy to feel helpless, out of control, adrift. But at the end of the day, try letting go of what you can't control and just focus on what you can control. The simple stuff. Wear a mask. Get vaccinated. Take care of your daily chores. Something that makes you feel that you have some control, some agency in this world. When it came to Nuseba, that meant, as a dad, just to be present. You know, building her Lego friend set when she asked me to build it. Watching Frozen 39 times, then followed by Zootopia 46 times, then followed by Moana 56 times. Getting her the tasty frozen yogurt from the hospital vending machine that she loved. Do what you can, the best you can. Have hope, but tie your camel first. And then be like Elsa from Frozen and let the rest go. Number 2, Invest in joy. Make the intention to actively invest in this thing called joy every day. Almost like a workout, you have to commit to it. It has to be a discipline. Build and flex that muscle. The world does not need more masochists or martyrs. It does not need more overworked, overstressed burnouts. New rule for 2022. You deserve to have moments of joy, even if they are fleeting, every day that you are alive. And you have to take those moments. You have to grab them. You have to seize them. I love food. So I learned how to cook Pakistani food, took my mom's recipes during lockdown. My kids love Lego, so that means now I love Lego. I love drinking chai. I make a cup of chai every day. It makes me happy. No matter how much stress or pain or misery I was going through, I made sure to invest time every day to invest in things and people and experiences that gave me joy. And finally, number 3, I would recommend, humbly, invest in the narrative of hope, because the alternative is apathy and cynicism. Investing in hope is painful. It means opening yourself up to the possibility of pain, betrayal, and disappointment. It's easier to court cynicism, right? You expect nothing, so you lose nothing. But it also means you have resigned yourself to the cheap seats. You are a spectator who yells out boo instead of being a participant in the ring, where your nose could get bloody, but at least you're pushing the ball forward. It means choosing apathy and nihilism, which is comforting and easy, but also lazy and destructive. During Nuseba's cancer, I used to sit up every night after my family went to sleep, and I stayed up till like 3 or 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. And instead I imagined, like Doctor Strange in Avengers Endgame, with the time stone, every possible scenario and outcome, just to prepare myself as a father. I had to emotionally prepare for every outcome. So I used to imagine Nuseba dying. I imagined burying her with my own hands. I imagined making the phone call to her grandparents, explaining that she had died, listening to them cry. I imagined living the rest of my life like a shell of a man, but pretending to put a smile on my face because I had a son to raise and now a daughter. My wife, badass that she is, was also pregnant during Nuseba's cancer. I had to be prepared. But I also chose to invest in a narrative in which Nuseba lived. And I imagined seeing her alive, with a liver transplant, smiling, regaining her hair, full of joy in life. I preferred that story. That's the story I invested in. Even as we were sitting on the edge of what seemed like a falling cliff, I decided I would put out the lawn chair and at least enjoy the scenery. Over 500 people, mostly strangers, chose to sign up to be donors for Nuseba. Even people who told me they hated me for my politics. They were moved by her story. Sometimes, some people can change. Sometimes, some people can choose to do and be good. An anonymous donor, Sean Zahir, decided to give a piece of his liver to a girl he never met just so she could live. I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not a foolish, wide-eyed, naive optimist. I'm a pragmatist, fully aware of the many challenges and horrors we are facing. But through my own personal experience, if it is all helpful, I can assure you that walking through this forest of horrors, going on this journey, wherever it may lead, if you choose to invest in hope, it at least makes the ride a bit sweeter and easier. And as the wise ram tells Po in Kung Fu Panda 2, your story may not have such a happy beginning, but that does not make you who you are. It is the rest of it, who you choose to be. Right now, survival is victory in this story that we are living. We are alive during a pandemic. We are winning. And just for that, we should be grateful. And I hope the choices we make in these challenging times will, inshallah, God willing, lead to a better story for all of us. And I believe that begins with choosing to invest in hope during hopeless times.
I, I've seen that before, but I could see it again and again. I don't know if any of you noticed when you came in the room, but they're on a yellow piece of something, some kind of foam. I wrote the word hope, and I took the H from hope. I put 3 dots, and then the O-P-E, the rest of the word, 3 dots, and then an N for, so I have open, and then hearts and minds. So to me, that's what hope is. when we have open hearts and open minds about what can be the next part of our life. And, in his case, his daughter survived and as well. And as he says further in his book, this story is still being written. Hope, when you turn their page, there could be a plot twist. So even if things are very bleak, the next day there could be a plot twist. So that's also in his book. He talked about he talked about personal experience, his story. And I think that we learn so much from other people's stories. We can empathize, and it just makes our life so much richer and sometimes easier. So I'd love to hear other thoughts about that video if anyone has something else they'd like to share. Interestingly enough, where I am downstairs, I can see you guys that are in the program room. So now you're waving to me. So I can see who goes up to the screen. So I'm sure there's a lot of reflection on just that video. So what Claudia and I are going to do is, so Claudia, you're all set for me to start, right? Yeah, okay. I'm going to call him Waj. That's how I'm going to refer to the author, Waj. Interesting. I listened to a lot of interviews, and one of the interviews I listened to is a lot of different people with 3-syllable names talked about how people really did a job on their names, and it was very, very humorous. And he interjects humor into just everything he does, and so much of it is really, really important stuff that having the angle of humor is very refreshing, and we get the picture. He discusses the idea and the issue of identity, and identity. Where do we belong? Where do we come from? Where are we going? All these issues. And when we were choosing the books for this year, we had done Mexican immigrants, we've done Somali immigrants, we've done Afghanistan, and we decided to do Asian. And really, Asia is so huge. And the first book that we did discuss last week, Beautiful Country, the Shen Julie is from China, and Waj is from Pakistan, which is, I mean, if you look at Asia, it's really, it's far, far to the west from, if you're looking at the map of the United States. And so there's so many different ethnic groups within Asia, and they often are lumped together, and people really want an identity to be able to belong, and people to see them as who they really are. And Claudia?
Yeah, I have a question. Should we be labeling people? I mean, I know that both of the authors have talked about, having forms, and you have to pick, am I Hispanic? Am I Asian American? Am I this or that? And it's like, what do you do if one parent is Japanese and one is German? Or, if his parents were from Pakistan, it's just like they don't know what box to check. And I'm wondering why do we have boxes? Like, why do we have to identify ourselves as us or them? Why do we have to be put into categories? I can see where there's times when it would be beneficial maybe to have identify as a group, if you're talking about medical research and treatments for certain groups of people. But I don't know what the thoughts of other people are about this practice of labeling people. Do you think you should always have to check off a box that says what you are? Or are we all just humans? Or are we different kinds of humans? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Should we do away with boxes? Should we have boxes? Is there any useful purpose for them? I mean, I think of World War II. I mean, they the reason the government was able to round up the Japanese Americans is they had a list of who everyone was, and that's what they used. And they rounded them up and put them into camps and took away their possessions and their rights. So, I mean, I can see the misuse. I don't know. What are your thoughts for? Should we have those boxes?
Alex, let's hear from you.
Oh, yeah, I'll be quick. I saw Joan wanted to jump in too, but I just wanted to say as a librarian, I wanted to speak in favor of boxes and labels. Certainly they can be used to harm, and the example especially that you just cited, Claudia, but it's also what we use to find things. A library is an obvious example. Without labels, you can be able to find the book you're after, but you can, apply that metaphor, I think, pretty broadly, even to the act of, it's not just things that we need to find, but it's the people we need to find that can, that reflect ourselves, where we can find that community feeling. And you can't do that without labels and boxes. So there's a good to it and there's a bad to it. And then there's just the fact that the world is going to apply, it's going to apply phenomena to us regardless. So we may as well group ourselves in ways that can help protect each other from some of those harms, because it's not going to stop. Sadly, that's just the nature of things. So I'm, for one, in favor of labels and boxes, even while understanding that there are definitely some misuses they can be put to.
Going along with what Alex said, I think that anything can be used in a harmful way. Anything that's helpful can also be harmful depending on how it's used. So I think we have to think about that too.
Yes, one of my first reactions to the questions you were asking was I kind of wanted to turn the question back and say, well, is there a purpose for the boxes? I mean, I guess I've always assumed when I filled out one of those, a form of something and had to check, which you don't have to do. I understand. I mean, I don't think if you don't check, don't check, I guess. I mean, I don't see how anybody can make you. But I thought, I always assumed that there was a reason for it. And I guess I didn't know exactly what it was, but what I think, I guess, is that there developed a feeling that we should be sensitive to the particular factors of a person's nationality, that we should be sensitive to that because there are differences. So I guess that's what the answer to that question is for me about, is there a purpose? And then I thought, there's such a thing, this kind of follows along with this, as pride in your heritage. I mean, I guess I have a reaction, which is, am I supposed to hide it? Am I supposed to, I think there is a point for people in having pride in what their heritage is. I'm thinking of I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So we had, I grew up with every kind of different person. And I think I saw that there. Okay, I'll just tell a little anecdote about my situation because I think it's funny, really. I mean, I guess it's funny. Maybe it's sad in a way, but I have an Italian last name that I wasn't born with that. That's my husband's name. But however, I was not born in this country. I was born in Newfoundland, which is now a province of Canada, but it was not a province of Canada then when I was born there. So it was a protectorate of Great Britain, I guess the way we have Guam or something like that. So anyway, my family didn't get here to this country permanently till I was 2 years old. My husband's, not only were both of his parents born in this country, which was a little bit unusual in Brooklyn at that time, His grandparents came here from Italy, but both of his parents were born in this country, and he and his brothers were born in this country. His mother and all of his relatives said Sal married an American girl. I was an American girl. I wasn't even born myself, never mind my parents. But to them, I was Anglo-Saxon, and it translated to American. I don't know whether that's amusing or sad. I mean, I don't even know.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. And it's like Waj finds humor in so much, and the fact that there's more than humor in there, but it's important. And
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate it.
I have to say one thing. I thought it was funny when he was talking about checking off the boxes, and then he said, there's a Pacific Islander on there. I always wanted to be a Pacific Islander. So I toyed with the idea of checking that box. So I thought that was kind of cute.
Okay. Let's see. I guess it's my turn, Claudia. Okay. Ali also talks about having to defend his very being and being regarded as a foreigner in his own country, and being told to go back to where he came from, even though he was born and raised in California. And that, of course, that's the title of the book. And I told that my niece about the book, and she said, oh, that is such a horrible, horrible name for a book. And so, the title really gets your attention, and then you go into it and you understand why he entitled it that. And so he always turns it around and says, yeah, I will go back to where I came from. I came from right here, right in California. And he also says that anyone who is Black or brown, that they've dealt with the reality of white supremacy their whole entire life. And it's something that I know Toni Morrison has said, and she said it in a quote in this book, that it's very exhausting to always have to prove yourself, and just always. And that was a comment that she made. So Claudia.
Yeah, just kind of going right into that. There's a section, I guess, in the first chapter where he talks about not being fully accepted as a young person. And maybe we can talk about why you think he felt that way. But I know one of them was, he did talk about so many groups want to get as far away from darkness as they can. And like another book I read by an Asian American, even like in other countries like Korea, the lighter your skin is, the more they think that's more desirable. And that's kind of maybe a sad commentary on our society, but this idea that you have to be as light as possible. So and he talks too about his accent. Well, even though he was born here, his parents wanted him to learn their native language. So he didn't really speak English until he started school. So he spoke his parents' native language. And when he started school, he couldn't speak the V sound. Just like I know I'm studying Spanish, and we in this country do not have the letter. We don't trill our R's. That's not in any of our vocabulary. In China, they don't have the R sound, or in his country that his parents came from, they didn't have the V sound. And I guess it's just like people judge you. In the last book, the author also was striving to speak like a native speaker. And do you think that we judge people on how they speak? Are there certain accents that are desirable and some aren't? Because, oh, they have a British accent. That's so cool. You have some other kind of accent and you're trying to hide it. And are we judging people by skin color? Are we judging people by the way they speak? I know some of you, I mentioned Trevor Noah. He is very adept at picking up different accents. And he, as a young person, learned very quickly, there was all these different groups in South Africa, that if he spoke a certain way, that he would be regarded with hostility. But if he changed the way he spoke, all of a sudden he was accepted. He was one of them just because he talked like them. He could be accepted. And I mean, what are your thoughts about why we have this, why so many groups are trying so desperately to get away from darkness, or why they're trying to change the way that they speak? Is this how we judge people? Have we been guilty of it? Like when it comes to language, do we judge people on their accent? We all have one. I mean, I wasn't born in New York, and I've been told I have an accent. So it's, you know.
I remember the woman who spoke last week. She was an ESL teacher, and it would be wonderful if teachers that helped with not English as their first language could inform the classroom teachers. Well, in this culture, they can't pronounce or have trouble pronouncing their V's or their W's. So it's like anything else. Once you have an understanding about it, it's much more easy to accept it, and even more than accept it. But without that understanding, you don't. There's fear, I guess, there could be fear. So I know she made the comment last week about she was an interface between classroom teachers and the students, which is a great thing. Alex, do you have something to say?
Yeah, and I think the person you were referring to was Janet. So Janet, if you wanted to say something directly in response to that, you can go ahead. Yeah,
Janet does too.
I just want to say that in my years of teaching, I very seldom worried about pronunciation. I only worked on pronunciation if I felt that a student just was not able to be understood at all. You want somebody to be able to understand, to be able to be understood, but to have an accent, it was much more important to me that they really learn the language and that they could learn academic language. And I always said, if Henry Kissinger could make it in this country, then these kids could too. So I think that was an aberration. Again, my experience is limited to what I did with my colleagues, but we didn't focus so much on the pronunciation unless a student was just unintelligible. You don't want that to happen either. People do need to be able to communicate. So that was it.
Thank you, Janet.
I think the desire of immigrants to blend in is the desire to be accepted. Everybody wants to fit in and belong. Look at teenagers. Whatever the in thing is, you have to have it because you want to be just like everybody else and not get picked on.
Yep.
And we as a country, anybody who's different from being white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, we've all been through it. My grandmother came from, well, we thought she came from Austria and spoke Russian, but years after she died, we found out she actually was speaking Ukrainian, would never talk about where she came from. My mother was but wanted to be American, and she would not allow us to learn the language. I was never able to talk directly to my grandmother because we are American. And the derivation of my family, of her family name is Polish. She blew up. We are not Polish. And it was just at that time, that's the way it was. And so now we're just slowly finding out more about her past that she just never would talk about. And we, couldn't ask her the questions. We are American.
Thank you, Sherry. Ed, did you have something to say?
One of the things I think, depending on your age, a lot of things we learn from our parents or from our peers, and some of our likes and dislikes for different languages or what we think about them, we've learned from others. But I have helped to tutor 5 different Spanish-speaking individuals over the last few years. And there's not one of them that was not what I consider very intelligent, even though they couldn't speak our language as such. They were very intelligent. And I too, probably literacy volunteers and ESL directors would not like it either, but I didn't worry too much about pronunciation either. As long as you could understand the word and they could make sense to you, this was as important as anything. As long as they could communicate, I didn't think it was necessary to totally change their language so that their pronunciation was exactly perfect. But again, these individuals were all very intelligent, and language just was one more small barrier for them, but nevertheless could learn, and just like anyone else. And this is part of what I think is important. When you go to check the box, I never see a box. I always think, where's the box for human being? I never see that one.
Thank you, Ed. Oh, Cindy, you're muted.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead, Peggy.
so this is very difficult. This is time for true confessions, because when you talk about language, my husband and I adopted an 11-year-old African-American child from New York City. And she had not spoken very much, and her way of communicating would be to whisper to the kids if she wanted something, like if she wanted the salt. So we right away said, no, Kathy, if you want the salt, you need to ask for the salt. And so we tried to get her to speak so she didn't have to whisper to somebody to get it. But what was really got me, here we are, these two white parents, Caucasian, having been raised middle class. And sometimes Kathy would talk with like, me do this or me do that. And, I would correct the English, and we would try to teach her to speak like we did. And at some point, somebody pointed out to me that with some of the original language, you always put your name first, like me do this, me do that. And that you could talk about this with saying that we have two languages. And I always regretted that I didn't know that. So I could say, okay, that's fine. You have one language and there's another language, and this is what we say. But being accepting of another language and another way of speaking. And I learned that. And another comment when you talked about people needing to get resources and huddle together, when I would be in New York often, and I worked with a lot of social workers, and in all my life I was working. And one time one of the workers said to me, she was African American, and she said, Peggy, you just got to understand, we get it so much. And sometimes if you see us all huddled together, and we just need to reinforce each other because we get so much criticism. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, I think language is important, and it's just, we do make judgments. I just think of all the movies you watch and you see the servant is always Chinese and he's speaking broken English, or, if you're Native American, they're speaking broken English, and somehow they come off as being unintelligent, and so we judge people by language. And I think we need to have more of an understanding of language and get past that. Alex?
Yeah, thanks. A lot of things have come up for me during this conversation. Like the first thing I was going to say is now completely by the wayside, but I wanted to appreciate Peggy for sharing that, because it's really important to, to recognize where we have learned over the years. And I think you definitely demonstrated that. We've learned a lot as a society about the reality of things like AAVE, African American Vernacular English, which is the official that term for the language you're speaking of, which is it has been studied and deemed to be a fully functioning legitimate language based on different styles of phonics. And again, here we come back to the wider society sometimes viewing that as less than, even though it is just the same as any other language. So thanks for bringing that up, Peggy. And I think that also speaks to the concept of code switching, which is something that largely, not exclusively, but largely those of us who are members of the, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant people background, we don't typically have to do it in our lives, but it's an additional burden that other members of our society have to carry. That is an additional part of like the mental load that they carry. And if you're not familiar, code switching is the ability, kind of like how Claudia referenced, Trevor Noah is so good at taking on different accents and things. It's not even just accents, it's entire ways of communicating based on what context he finds himself in. And that was a very important thing for him to do as a biracial person growing up in apartheid South Africa. And people do it in our country all the time, every day, in ways that are invisible to those of us who identify as white, but which is nevertheless a significant part of what those folks are carrying and appeasing us in many ways. So something for us to be mindful of. And we keep hearing the word, just to make a quick third point related to all of this, the word belonging keeps coming up, both from the source book and from the comments here. As I indicated last week, in the meantime, we've had a library program all about belonging. Janet was there, and some other folks were there. We had a really great conversation about that. And one of the key things that I took away from one of the speakers we watched a video about was the idea that belonging doesn't happen without the group that one is trying to fit into offering an invitation. Like if I wanted to try to fit into a group that I don't quite fit into, it doesn't matter what I do to change myself if the other group isn't willing to invite me in and embrace me. And sometimes that happens and it's wonderful, and that's the way we hope for society to operate. But so often those groups are rigid and unyielding, and we're trying to shape ourselves to fit into something that's never truly going to accept us. And so that's one of the things we have to realize about this give and take between acceptance and belonging. It's a little bit sad to think about, but we can think about ways to make the spaces that we are in more open to the belonging of others, and by embracing all the differences that people bring with them into our groups.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, the book brought up so many parallels between other things. I don't know, a couple of years ago, if any of you saw Black Klansman, it was out at the movies, but it's a true story about a Black detective who went undercover in and he was able to pass, again, playing with got some noises coming in. But anyway, he had a conversation with David Duke on the phone, and David Duke was telling him, I can always tell a Black person by the way they talk, and they drop their R's and blah, blah, blah. Well, the detective, he could go easily from like, your standard, I don't know what to call it, standard English, whatever, to African-American vernacular, but he goes, really, can you? And he's taking this perfect, English, and then the next thing is I guess, shawa. He's just this whole idea that people, put people into these categories and think that they can judge them. But yeah, I think I enjoy the comments that everybody's made. Cindy, did you have some comments?
No, I get frustrated when I'm trying to order something on Amazon or something, and I can't understand the person who I'm talking with on the phone. And I think to myself, that person knows English and I don't know their language. I mean, they're trying and they're doing the best they can, and I should sit back on my heels a little bit and not be quite so ready to judge and be critical to get my order done. I wanted to, in Waj's introduction, he states that he doesn't want to be a token member of a model minority to prove the U.S. is open-minded and tolerant. And so the term model minorities, comes up a lot now. And so a good Asian, and that's in quotes, of the model minority works hard, without complaining, smiles away any problems, and we will accept you, oh model minority, if you are silent, if you are complicit, and if you are invisible. So that's what a lot of Asian Americans are up against, because they're considered the model minority at this point. I'm not sure in other times in history whether there have been different groups. Maybe some of you know better than I about that, but right now, Asian Americans. So that's really tough. And I know we saw that described and talked about in the story about Julie last week, how they, you know, they were silent, they were complicit, they were invisible, and that's it's really, really tough for Asian Americans to live up to that, and so sad that they have to be accepted. I don't know if there's anybody have any thoughts that they want to share about model minority.
I always thought, I think it's true that just about every nationality that has first come to this country has gone through a period of being prejudiced against and being thought less than. I think the Chinese have been through it 2 or 3 times, frankly. I mean, because I know way in the past when there were many Chinese people, they built out, at the time the railroads were being built, they were working on that a lot, and I think they were prejudiced against then. One thing that's very difficult for people to even realize now, some people, is that the Irish went through a terrible time of being considered inferior. And I mean, signs Irish need not apply, and you know, really just basic awfulness, even though they were of the same race as what was supposed to be ideal.
They were Catholic. That was the issue. The Irish were Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
That was the issue. Tremendous prejudice against Catholicism. I can remember hearing adults when I was growing up saying that if Kennedy got elected president, the Pope would be running the country. And that was the way it was.
Thank you, Sherry. Nancy?
There's a section in the book where he was trying to get money for his play.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman with a lot of influence, he was afraid to like really ask for money. And she was in the audience and she told him, you've got to stand up, you've got to talk and be bold. I've worked with a lot of young guys who are preparing for citizenship. And one of the things I told them, you may like this or not like this, but Americans are rude and they're loud. And you can't go to your interview and kind of mumble. You've got to speak up. So become loud.
Thanks, Nancy, for sharing that. Ed, what have you got to share?
Can you hear me all right? One of the things I think it's so important for activities like this and for reading different books. And I get so discouraged at people around the country who are, you know, shutting down libraries, banning books and banning discussions of different topics, because this is the way we learn about each other, is through discussion, through reading. And it just seems such a shame that this kind of thing is being foisted upon us in different areas. And the other thing I got thinking about when we were talking about different languages, not that it has a whole lot of meaning to, I guess, to this discussion, but I remember last year hearing former President Obama speak, and he was saying while he was in the White House, he and his vice president, Joe Biden at the time, had this little secret language that they used to communicate back and forth to each other on different topics. He didn't elaborate, but I thought it was interesting that they formed this special language so that they could communicate in private, even though they were somewhat in public. So language is important.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time. We can discuss a little bit more, but chapter 4 was titled "Be Moderate So America Will Maybe Love You Conditionally One Day, Inshallah," which means God willing. The author makes the assertion that I think a lot of people believe that moderate Muslims are the exception. What do you think about that? Do you agree? Do you think that moderate Muslims are the exception? Do you think they're mostly radical, or do you think that most of them are just kind of, in the middle somewhere? What do you think the perception of most Americans is toward the Muslim population in this country? And I guess while you're thinking about it, I have to share this with you. This was really interesting. He gave a statistic. The National Security Entry Exit Registration System, I guess it was created right after 9/11. And I think it was in 2002, but he gave these statistics. It's on page 106 if you have the same book as me, but he said 13,153 individuals, most of them who were Muslim, were deported. Okay. 93,000 cases went to court. And the interesting part was not one single terrorist conviction. So, we have this fear and we tend to lump everybody together. Like if a white person goes out and commits a terrorist act or a murder or rape, we don't all of a sudden say all white people are murderers and rapists. But if you belong to a certain ethnic group and one person in your group commits an atrocity, then everybody is labeled with that. And we don't think sometimes about that. And even there's even a part where the author said he was talking about whenever he's on a talk show or a news show, they would introduce him as, oh, he's that Muslim guy, or he's that funny Muslim guy, or he's that liberal Muslim guy. And he's saying they don't, if you had a white person on the show, they wouldn't say, oh, he's that Methodist so-and-so, or the Episcopalian. He said, we weren't talking about religion. So my religion had nothing to do with anything. And there was, I guess, one time he was interviewed or something, and they didn't say he's a Muslim guy or anything. He goes, oh, it was so liberating. I was just an American guy. I don't have that label. So I guess we talk a little bit about what you think, the perception of Muslims is in this country. And is it fair to, do we let our fear get away with us and we label everybody with the same big broad, or we paint them with the same broad paintbrush? What do we do about that?
I think you've hit,
Alex?
Yeah, I think you've hit on one of the occasions when labels are bad, when it's when they're simply used, when there's no relevance to the label, just to kind of, set up the next, talking heads thing on Geraldo or whatever. And it brings me back to a quote that I'm probably going to misuse, but it's Isabel Wilkerson's quote. And I'll say a paraphrase. I don't remember exactly how she put it, but it's important that we pay attention to the differences that make a difference. So if Mr. Ali is being brought onto a TV show to discuss relations between Muslims and non-Muslims in America, then that's a difference that makes a difference. And so, okay, here we have Muslim and media expert Wajahat Ali to speak on that. But if he's coming on to, talk about his child's liver surgery, maybe not so much is that a difference that makes a difference. And that's kind of taking the quote a little bit out of the context it's usually used in, but I think it's a really helpful barometer, especially going back to that original question about labeling and when it's appropriate, when it's useful, when it's helpful. Does the label bring something to the discussion? Is the discussion somehow about that label, that identity? So another good example of when that's not a great thing. Was somebody here going to step up or no? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We got somebody stepping up here.
Claudia, you mentioned the label moderate Muslim. Did I hear that?
Yeah.
correctly?
Yes.
My own feeling is that most of us, whatever our hair color is, or whether or not we wear nail polish or what color our skin is. I think we're moderate. Us moderates are pretty boring. We don't sell many books. We don't make many movies. We don't make a lot of noise. So what we're barraged with are the outliers. And because we tend to get influenced by them. And I'm not going to say anything about Tucker Carlson. But I think if we can sort through the noise, there's some good music, but it's hard to find. And I think having this group, having us folks sort through all these labels, we can find those labels that are good ones. But we have to keep working at it. Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Jim.
Thank you.
I just want to say something real quick, Cindy. I guess we're almost at 4, and I know you had some closing remarks, but I'm thinking about what Jim just said. The chapter about domestic crusader. Remember, the author wrote a play. He was encouraged, just like our author in the other book was encouraged by people to write a play about our normal, regular Pakistani family. And that he felt it was important just to see these are just ordinary, boring people that do all the same things that you do every day. There was one, of course, I thought it was also ironic that Hollywood offered to do it, but they wanted to have Ted Danson play the Pakistani father. Like, really? It misses the whole point of what he was trying to do. But anyway, I guess Alex has something, and then Cindy, maybe you can kind of wrap things up for us. So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there's a comment in the chat room that I wanted to make sure didn't get lost. So it's from Meryl saying, Meryl writes, I had to forget about some stereotypical ideas about Muslim women, such as male dominance, oppression, cover your hair, be quiet kind of life. Waj's women are smart, outspoken, and fairly tolerant. Since Waj was 30 years old, better he should marry outside of the Muslim community than to never marry. They want his happiness more than anything. Thanks for sharing that, Meryl.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, just a quick note about can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. The Domestic Crusaders is the play that Waj Ali wrote prior to writing this book, and it's just about everyday life in a family, Muslim family. And he said he wrote it after 9/11. He said writing that play saved his life. And I know I think about, are there events in my life that saved my life? And it's just something that I want to reflect on. But it was after that, and he was encouraged to write this book, and he wrote it in 2.5 months, this whole book. And they just kept badgering him to write the book, and he finally just started writing, didn't have any rhyme or reason of format, and it came out with what we're discussing today. One of the interviews that I listened to, the interviewer said, Waj, what would you like readers to take away from this book? And this is what he said. This book is a love letter to a country that doesn't love the rest of us. It is an elegy for the rest of us who are still not considered to be American. It's about those of us who are both us and them, considered to be citizens and suspects, where Americans have an asterisk next to our names, and our citizenship is conditional. So that was his response. And then in closing, he was really big on having 3 steps to different, wanting us to get his point. And he wanted us to remember, knowing that we're all overwhelmed and we're all exhausted and it's really easy to tap out. And we talked about nobodies. Jim spoke about nobodies. he says we're nobodies and that he loves nobodies. And he wants every nobody to feel like there is somebody, because everyone has something that he or she can choose to do. So number one, he wants us to choose to be aware. And that's what all of us today, we're choosing to be here. We're choosing to discuss the book. We're choosing to become more aware of these issues and how very important that is. And number two is have faith and hope, even though things are bleak, but tie up your camel first. That's a Muslim saying. So have faith and hope, but tie up your camel first. And the third thing is to invest in the narrative of hope, to be intentional and do something, model behavior. And the smallest, just, with someone in your family, with the people that you're with in community or social groups, to model the behavior that is positive and good. And that is a first step. And I'm going to leave you with a couple quotes, and then Claudia has a couple things to share. There's a saying in the Hadith, which is a Muslim book of traditional quotations. Even if you see the end coming, plant a seed. And then another thing to ponder, you can't see the future with tears in your eyes. So I leave you with those thoughts. And Claudia, you want to share a little bit about what's up?
I just want to I want to thank you all. You all are wonderful. And I hope that you'll be able to join us again. And we have 2 more events. That's all I wanted to tell you. May 5th, May 12th, same time, same place, Friday, 3 o'clock. So next Friday, we're going to have a guest speaker. His name is Dr. Karam Hussein. He originally was, I'll read it from here, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Dean of Hobart College, Hobart and William Smith College. It's for quite a long time. He is now in a very similar position in Middlebury College in Vermont, and yet through the wonder of technology and Zoom, he will be able to come and speak to us through Zoom, and he's willing to do that. And so he'll be talking about some of these things, belonging and inclusion. So I hope that you'll join us. So we'll have an expert here. And then May 12th is really exciting too, because we have members of our own community here, and they're going to share some of their experiences from their unique backgrounds. And I think it's wonderful when we have our own community and they can share with us. So hopefully you'll join us. And thank you again. You're all wonderful. And you've taken the first step, is becoming aware of what's going on around you and becoming informed. That's where we start. So thank you very much.